Welcome back to Theology on Ice, a Reformed Catholic podcast. I'm your host, Sean D. Gates, and today I'm going to attempt to discuss one of the most tense theological debates of our modern era that is especially relevant in my own province of the ACNA. That is, the issue of women's holy orders, focusing specifically on the question of whether one church can simultaneously ordain women and not ordain women. Thank you for joining, and I invite you now to pull up a chair, light your cigar, and grab your drink so that together we can begin to pour some theology on ice. There are few issues within the Anglican Church in North America that are more emotionally charged, institutionally delicate, and theologically unresolved than the issue of women's ordination. And yet, for all the controversy that surrounds this issue, most discussions remain frustratingly shallow. The debate is often reduced to questions like, what does 1 Timothy say? Was Junia an apostle? Can women preach? Or is this really a salvation issue? But I would argue that the deepest problem facing the ACNA is not fundamentally exegetical, nor is it merely practical, political, or sociological, but the question is ecclesiological. Can a church sustain contradictory sacramental theologies of holy orders within one ecclesial body? Because that is what the ACNA is currently attempting to do. And I am increasingly unconvinced that this arrangement can survive indefinitely. The ACNA has attempted to preserve unity by constitutionally permitting differentiation on the question of women's holy orders. For example, Article 8 of the Constitution states that the province shall make no canon abridging the authority of any member, diocese, or networks, whether regional or affinity-based, and those dioceses banded together as jurisdictions, with respect to its practice of regarding ordination of women to the diaconate or presbyterate. And likewise, in 2017, the College of Bishops issued the following statement. It said, "We agree that there is insufficient scriptural warrant to accept women's ordination to the priesthood as standard practice throughout the province. However, we continue to acknowledge that individual dioceses have constitutional authority to ordain women to the priesthood." This is a fascinatingly and deeply revealing arrangement. On one hand, the bishops collectively seem to acknowledge that there is insufficient biblical warrant to establish women's ordination as normative. But on the other hand, the province simultaneously protects the right of dioceses to continue the practice. The result is structurally embedded theological asymmetry. The province declines to affirm women's ordination universally, yet refuses to prohibit it locally. And this is not merely allowing disagreement. It is institutionalized sacramental differentiation. And that distinction matters enormously. Most conversations surrounding women's ordination focus almost entirely on function. Can women preach? Can women lead? Can women pastor? And can women administer a parish? But within classical Anglican theology, particularly within Anglo-Catholic traditions, holy orders is not primarily functional. It's sacramental. And this is where the discussion becomes much more serious. The official ACNA Catechism, to be a Christian, affirms holy orders as a sacramental rite of the Church. And likewise, the 39 Articles, while distinguishing holy orders from the dominical sacraments of baptism and Eucharist, nevertheless treats ordination as a grace-bearing ecclesial reality that is vitally important to the life of the Church. And this is why Anglicanism historically insisted upon episcopal polity, apostolic succession, and ordained ministry received through the laying on of hands. These are not merely organizational preferences, but they are sacramental claims. And once holy orders is understood sacramentally, the question fundamentally changes. The issue is no longer merely, can women perform priestly functions? The issue becomes, can women receive the sacrament of holy orders? And that is an ontological question, not merely a practical one. One of the deepest tensions within current ACNA settlements on holy orders is that holy orders is historically been understood as one sacrament expressed through three orders. There's the order of deacon, the order of priest, and the order of bishop. It's not three unrelated sacraments, nor is it three disconnected ministries. It's one sacramental reality in differentiated form. So this matters because the ACNA has already universally closed the episcopate to women. That's, women may serve as deacons in many dioceses, women may serve as priests in some dioceses, but women may absolutely not become bishops anywhere within the province. But the obvious question is why? Holy orders is fundamentally sacramental rather than merely functional. And if this is true, then the restriction of the episcopate creates a profound theological tension because bishops do not possess a different sacrament than priests and deacons. Actually, the episcopate is traditionally understood as the fullness of holy orders. So if women cannot receive the fullness of holy orders, on what sacramental principle can they receive priestly or diaconal orders? This is the question that many Anglo-Catholics within the ACNA continue to press, and it's not a trivial question. Within a classical Anglo-Catholic framework, holy orders must be validly conferred in the order for sacramental ministry to be validly exercised. And this is where the issue becomes existential rather than procedural. Because if holy orders is sacramental and ontological, then invalid orders do not merely create an administrative irregularity. It creates a sacramental uncertainty. So, if a priest is not validly ordained, then serious questions emerge concerning whether or not the Eucharist they consecrate is a true Eucharist, whether or not the absolution that they pronounce in the confessional is a true absolution, and whether or not they actually are in apostolic continuity itself. Has apostolic succession ended in their line? And this is why many Anglo-Catholics do not experience women's ordination as a debate that is a secondary issue, because the concern is not merely should women serve in ministry. The concern is, are sacraments being validly administered? And that is a different category of disagreement. Historically, Anglicanism has preserved and survived through disagreements over predestination and ceremonial practice, Marian devotion, Eucharistic explanation, and churchmanship, but those disagreements generally occurred within a shared sacramental universe. Even where Anglicans disagreed about how Christ was present in the Eucharist, they still recognized one another's priesthood and sacramental ministry. The current debate may be fundamentally different because the disagreement potentially concerns whether sacramental acts are occurring at all. And for centuries, Anglicanism has prided itself on comprehensiveness. The Anglican tradition historically held together evangelicals, Anglo-Catholics, charismatics, and broad churchmanship, all within one ecclesial structure. But comprehensiveness only functions when certain foundational assumptions were made shared. And that is precisely what now may be breaking down. The ACNA currently contains dioceses and clergy who operate with radically different understandings of priesthood, sacramental ontology, and apostolic succession, and then the nature of ordination itself. So, some view holy orders as primarily functional, and others view it as sacramental. So, these are not merely different emphases. They may represent fundamentally different ecclesiologies. And eventually, every church must determine whether there are limits to theological diversity, because sacramental theology imposes limits on ecclesial pluralism. Many within the ACNA continue to treat the issue as unfortunate but manageable. Statements like, well, I'm complementarian, but this isn't a salvation issue. Or, I support women's ordination, but it isn't worth dividing the church over, have become increasingly common. But history suggests that unresolved theological contradictions rarely remain dormant indefinitely. Oftentimes, churches fracture not because disagreement exists, but because fundamental disagreements are indefinitely deferred in the name of institutional peace. And this issue reaches deeper than many are willing to admit. The 39 articles identify the marks of the visible church as the pure preaching of the Word of God and the due administration of the sacraments. Yet, the ACNA bishops themselves have already acknowledged that insufficient scriptural warrant exists to establish women's ordination as standard practice throughout the province, and simultaneously, many Anglo-Catholics within the province believe that women's ordination introduces serious tensions to the sacramental coherence of holy orders itself. Thus, for many within the ACNA, the debate implicates both word and sacrament, the two marks of the visible church. And that is why this cannot indefinitely remain categorized as a secondary issue. The deeper issue facing the ACNA is no longer whether women may serve an ordained ministry. The question is whether a province can remain sacramentally coherent while sustaining contradictory doctrines on the sacraments within the same ecclesial body. Can one diocese regard another diocese's sacramental theology as fundamentally defective while still maintaining full ecclesial communion? Can a church remain visibly united where sacramental recognition itself becomes uncertain? I myself have heard several Anglican priests admit that if a congregant of theirs were to travel and wish to attend an ACNA parish while they're away, but the ACNA parish available to them is one in which a woman is a priest, that they would actually instruct them to attend a Lutheran, Presbyterian, or even a Catholic parish instead. And can a church with this kind of view of its own ministers survive? Can a church in which certain ministers actually have more confidence in ministers from other traditions than within their own? Can that survive? Those are not rhetorical questions anymore. Those are questions that are directly confronting the ACNA as we speak. And history suggests that churches rarely remain indefinitely stable once sacramental trust begins to erode. The ACNA will eventually need to determine whether its current settlement represents genuine Anglican comprehensiveness or merely a temporary ceasefire within a deeper unresolved ecclesiological crisis. Because Anglicanism has historically survived disagreements over theology, ceremony, and churchmanship, but it's far less clear whether it can survive disagreements over whether its sacraments are truly being administered at all. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm coming at this from an unconnected and biased and even an angry view of women's holy orders. Honestly, in a general sense, you could say that I really don't care what the ACNA chooses to do in terms of whether or not it chooses to fully affirm women's holy orders or fully reject it. But my concern is that the desire to remain nuanced enough as to not take a stance on either. Because the two pillars of thought, of the complementarian and egalitarian views of this, as I hope that I've shown here, they are not just two different thoughts that can exist in the same church, but they're actually directly incompatible thoughts that lead to a whole question of whether or not the marks of the visible church are even there anymore. And so, ultimately, this isn't an episode to try to destroy egalitarian arguments or to bolster complementarian ones, but simply to note and help to recognize the tension that this discussion is having in our modern time, and to really ask and beg our bishops, our clergy, and just the ACNA as an entity to really wrestle with this argument and not to brush it off as a secondary issue. Because can it really be a secondary issue if the church is divided against itself? As Jesus said, can a house divided against itself stand? And the answer is almost always no. Now, this has been another episode of Theology on Ice, a Reformed Catholic podcast, and I am still your host, Sean D. Gates. I hope this episode was both helpful and charitable in understanding and explaining these current tense issues of women's holy orders in the ACNA. And I hope to do an episode soon giving my thoughts. Of course, I'm a man, so this is always more nuanced than it should be, but then trying to give my thoughts on some of the ways in which I think that women can participate in ministry within the church, though not through the sacrament of holy orders. As always, please, if you have any questions, thoughts, or ideas for future episodes, leave them in the comments below. Also, feel free to subscribe to this channel so that you will be notified anytime a new episode is released. Also, look into my Substack, where I've started to post some of my own academic articles. So thank you so much for listening. I cannot wait for next time when I will invite you back to pull up a chair, light your cigar, and grab your drink so that together we can once again pour some theology on ice. God bless.